Okay, thank you, Mr. Senator. And again, all of us in this industry, in this room in particular today, are internally grateful for his leadership and his contributions in those early days in convincing lawmakers to take action and repeatedly take action in a means to stabilize this industry and allow us to continue and keeping our employees in good stead along the way. So we thank him again. At this time, I'd like to invite another Diamond Level sponsor, guest speaker, Ismael Mokabel, currently leads MHI RJ Aviation Group Aftermarket business unit, which is the largest regional MRO in the United States with over 30 lines of maintenance, supporting more than 1,300 CRJ series aircraft in service globally. Having more than 15 years experience in the aviation industry, Ismael leads over 1,200 employees covering an executive scope inclusive of customer support, product support, program management, commercial services, MRO service centers, material services, and supply chain management. He's a thought leader who uses his strategic leadership, strong communication skills, and high emotional energy to inspire and influence his teams. Will you please join me in welcoming Ismael Mokabel?
Thank you, Dion. That was quite the intro. Thank you for that. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ismael Mokabel. I'm the Senior Vice President, Head of Aftermarket of MHI RJ Aviation Group. So for the slides, we just use the clicker. All right, so MHI RJ Aviation Group. I have the privilege of running the aftermarket organization that supports and services your CRJ fleet. MHI RJ has been founded in June of 2020, and this was incepted with, of course, the acquisition and the transfer of the CRJ program from Bombardier to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. We are headquartered out of Montreal, Canada. As you can see behind me here, our beloved city offers a wide array of colors in the fall. So in support of local tourism and the regional aviation flying cause, it's an open invitation here to the RAA community to come visit our city and our headquarters in the north of Montreal. So with that, we'll have a few topics to cover together. Oops. We'd like to talk about the MRO and aftermarket outlook on the next 5 and 10 years. We'll also want to share some of the lessons learned in supply chain. I think the COVID cycle has not been very kind on the supply chain. We're living it in our industry. We're seeing it even in some of the fast-moving commodities. We're hearing about FedEx, Costco, Nike having supply chain issues as a result of COVID. And we'll touch upon a very important topic that the panel today have discussed at length around the demographic challenge in the US for the aircraft maintenance technicians. So in a normal course, there's about a 3-phase cycle, post a disruption, stabilization, recovery, and then growth. The uniqueness of the cycle we're living in today is that we're actually living simultaneously through these 3 phases across our industry. We have aspects of the industry that are still stabilizing, aspects are actually in the recovery mode, and we are seeing some aspects of the industry today that are actually exceeding pre-COVID levels of growth. So it's a pretty interesting challenge that we're facing right now as an industry. Now, if you look at the aftermarket outlook over the next 5 to 10 years, a little bit of delay here. So while we're getting the slide up, I'm using the word aftermarket here. I know in the industry we use MRO and aftermarket sometimes interchangeably. So we're using it as a catch-all for the heavy maintenance spend across the industry. Perfect. All right. So I'm sharing with you here what you see in this slide is the pretty much total aftermarket spend on commercial aviation. So you see 2020 is about $50 billion. That's expected to grow to about $100 billion by 2025. And 2020 was about 30 to 40% regression from where we were in 2019. If you look at the next 5 years, that represents a 15% compounded growth. There's quite the heavy recovery, and the projections that we're going to be actually hitting the 2019 levels by 2022, heading into 2023, depending, of course, on the utilization recovery in 2021. Now, if you look at the distribution of the spend, so the lion's share of the spend, 45%, a bit less than half, is with our propulsion friends, GE, Pratt & Whitney, and Rolls-Royce. And you can see between component and airframe maintenance, it's about 20% each, and 15% for line maintenance. Now, that's expected to grow about 2%. That's for the regional, sorry. And the regional market represents about 10% of that total space. Now, the regional market is also expected to recover to pre-COVID levels for MRO by 2022. And that's on the back of two things: the organic demand of the fleet, but also the pent-up demand coming out of some curtailment of maintenance that happened in 2020 as well. That is causing a bit of a bubble right now. We're living in it in 2021. That is also going to take us into 2022. And this is where we hit pretty much pre-COVID levels. And that's a compounded growth from 2020 to 2025 for the regional market of about 6%. Now, the verdict is out there. What's going to happen on, the second half of the decade between the props and the jets and the new technology. So I'm not going to speculate there, but nonetheless, it goes without saying that the fleet needs is going to continue to grow. And we expect about a 2% CAGR if you really take the decade from 2020 to 2030, despite all the different variables that can come and play into that for the aftermarket. Next slide. So there's two fundamental things as an industry we need to really focus on to be able to keep the fleet flying. One is an agile and sustainable supply chain, and there's a lot of vulnerabilities that got exposed during the COVID cycle that we as an industry have to learn from and really evolve the supply chain in lieu of that. And then we hit on that today quite a bit, and I'm going to share with you some statistics that actually really position this problem statement as an industry scale around the availability of trained and available workforce to help us support this aftermarket needs over the next 5 to 10 years. Next slide. So if we hit a bit on the supply chain, and we've seen a lot of vulnerabilities really going through that cycle. If you look at the consolidation that happened on the tier one, right? What happened with Raytheon Technologies, Collins, which is UTAS, before that Hamilton Sandstrand, and Goodrich and Rockwell, and now what happened with Safran and Honeywell. There was quite a bit of consolidation that happened at the tier one level. But we've seen through that cycle, there was a lot of disruption happening at the tier 2 and tier 3. When a lot of these companies do not have the financial capital to be able to weather the storm, and they become now the weakest link in the supply chain. It's inevitable that there's going to be some consolidation in that space. I've actually seen some new funds raising millions of dollars to be able to start spooling up liquidity and do some consolidation in general machining and heavy machining as well in the tier 2 and tier 3. So we're going to be seeing that evolution over the next 5 to 10 years of consolidations in the tier 2, tier 3, which became one of the weakest links, frankly, in the supply chain through this COVID cycle. Another element that is more tailored towards an aftermarket sort of requirements and supply chain versus the mass production of new aircraft deliveries is we need some sort of a rapid response is when you have a disruption as a result of a pandemic or a shortage or a labor issue. We need to have an alternate source of supply and spooling up what we call short order shops, SOS shops, that do more variety, less volume. So unlike the mass production that supports production, for the aftermarket, you might want to have specialized shops that can do more variety, less volume. That is going to play a bigger role in the supply chain supporting the aftermarket as well going forward. And we've seen some of that reduce the lead time by 70% from the conventional production sources. Another alternate or a new way of thinking is about making parts closer to the point of use. And of course, that has to be technology enabled with the 3D printing now heading into more and more exotic metals. I think it's inevitable at a certain point we'll be making parts at the MRO or in the distribution network versus the conventional supply chain inventory, sort of build and then distribute. Making parts closer to the point of use will be a technology that will evolve the supply chain sort of response going forward as well for our industry, which is much needed to be able to keep the fleet flying and support the aftermarket. And last but not least, it's a function of the fleet age. So over the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a replacement cycle. And by default, you're going to have aircraft retiring. And the used serviceable material market is going to take a bigger play out of the supply chain feed going forward just by sheer availability and providing an alternate source for the airlines to have more economical solutions during, I'd say, a mature life cycle of the product. And of course, from an environmental perspective, refurbishing and reusing has a favorable carbon footprint as well going forward. Next. Now on the AMT demographic challenge, and as Dion mentioned in the intro, we have the privilege of overseeing the biggest MRO network in the world, actually, with over now 35 heavy maintenance lines, at any given time. So it's a topic that is very close to our heart and is a real challenge, I think, in the US. And actually, it's just starting now. We did talk about that. I remember in Nashville, Faye and Rick Leach at the time was the chairman of that round, actually put a call to action to the industry to start thinking hard about the AM aircraft maintenance technicians demographic challenge. And frankly, COVID made the challenge even bigger. So interesting stats, pre-COVID, the median age of that workforce was 51 years. That's 10 years older than the average US labor force. About 50% of the employed labor today is predicted to retire by 2030. 30% are already at retirement age, and only 2% of the population is new feeds coming into the pipeline. So the equation is extremely unbalanced. And if you look at the new Boeing outlook that they just published, 2021 to 2040, they are predicting that 132,000 new technicians will be required in the industry over that time horizon. If you do the modeling, actually, we're expecting by 2023 and 2024 that the influx will happen, that the demand is going to exceed the infrastructure supply today that is supplying technicians to the market. And that's a big problem for our industry and a big problem for actually the national security, because the regional market is part of the critical infrastructure that supports and transports people and goods, essential goods and services. And it will be constrained if that problem statement is not resolved with an industry response. Now, I think one element that is key that we have to think about is also how we can use the partnerships we have between the US, Canada, and Mexico, even for the short term, to allow ease mobility of technicians between the countries to be able to help us with the ebbs and flows of the demand on maintenance. That can be one of the solutions, but it's inevitable that the whole infrastructure that pumps new entries into that field has to expand. We need to make it more lucrative and enticing for the young population to come and be attracted to these type of jobs. They are well paid and with benefit jobs, but I think we need to tap into the new gen thinking, but also maybe with collaboration with the government, help repurpose some of the highly skilled sets that over the next 10 years or so will shrink, like in the energy segment. There's a lot of very highly skilled labor. Is there programs that we can put out there that can help repurpose some of these skills into aviation to help with the demographic challenge we're going to be facing in the MRO segment? And that challenge is impacting, of course, the heavy maintenance, impacting the line maintenance, going to impact the fleet at large, and requires a coordinated effort for us to tackle as an industry. So with that, if you go to the last slide, there is quite a bit of aftermarket growth ahead of us than behind us. And you saw the CAGRs, whether on the commercial aviation or only for the regional aviation, that growth is ahead of us. 2022 is going to be, again, a banner year for us. A lot of recovery and actually growth is going to be happening between the next 12 to 24 months. We're going to be hitting pre-COVID levels. Actually, some aspects of our business today are at higher than pre-COVID levels. So there is a lot of demand right now to support, as we mentioned, the pent-up demand and the organic need of the fleet. So it's coming, and we're living it right now. There is going to be an inevitable evolution in the supply chain with a lot of lessons learned coming out of COVID to tailor more oriented supply chain solutions towards the aftermarket needs. And we are on the front face of that. And last but not least, as we mentioned, the AMT challenge requires an industry/government response, given the importance of it and the magnitude of what we're tackling here as an industry. So lots of work ahead of us. We're here laser focused to help support the flying fleet and keep the aircrafts in the air. And these are three elements that we need to focus on and rally together as an RAA, of course, with the support of RAA, to help us tackle that in support of the flying fleet. So with that, thank you very much. Enjoy your conference. And I hope this presentation was insightful and engaging for you. Cheers.
Okay,